In this video, we're going to be talking about the moral problem of privacy. The first argument that we're going to go over is the consequentialist argument for surveillance. And it goes, actions are morally required if and only if they would maximize good results. Active and passive surveillance does sometimes maximize good results. Therefore, both active and passive surveillance are sometimes morally required. Any action that is morally required is morally permitted. Therefore, both active and passive surveillance are sometimes morally permitted. So this is an argument in favor of surveillance against some kinds of privacy, to the extent that this surveillance will improve results. What might be some arguments against the consequentialist argument? A first counter might be that actions are morally required not if and only if they would maximize good results. So this would straightforwardly be a rejection of consequentialism as the theory that regards moral requirements as a maximization of good results. A second counter might be active and passive surveillance does not sometimes maximize good results. So maybe active and passive surveillance hurts good results sometimes. So even on a consequentialist's own standards of maximizing good results, maybe surveillance sometimes doesn't. Maybe there are some good results that depend on a little bit of privacy. Another counter might be that some action that is morally required is not morally permitted. So maybe some things are permitted, or maybe some things are required, but they're not permitted. That would seem to be a fairly implausible claim, because it just seems like when we say something's morally required, we're implying that it's morally permitted already. It would seem weird to say that it's required, but you're not allowed to do it. But if we had some kind of strange theory of requirement and permission, maybe we could have some things required that aren't permitted. Maybe if rights conflict and one right requires it and another right permits it, or maybe if one right requires it but another right does not permit it, maybe we could have a conflict of rights situation that makes us have something that's required but not permitted. Another argument is the consequentialist argument for state secrecy. So this argument is similar to the previous one, and it goes, actions are morally required if and only if they would maximize good results. Keeping state secrets will sometimes maximize good results. Therefore, the state is sometimes morally required to keep state secrets from the public. Any action that is morally required is morally permitted. Therefore, the state is sometimes morally permitted to keep secrets from the public. So what might be a counter to the consequentialist argument for state secrecy? Again, the first thing we could do is we could reject consequentialism. Another counter we could run is that keeping state secrets will not sometimes maximize good results. Basically, maybe keeping state secrets is always bad. But it does seem like sometimes state secrets are good. For example, the nuclear codes are a state secret, and it seems good that they're a state secret because it seems like a bad state of affairs if just any old person has the nuclear codes. That doesn't seem like a very stable society. A last counter similarly could be some action that's morally required is not morally permitted. This is identical to our counter from the previous slide. Another argument is the privacy argument from autonomy, and it goes, if our interests in maintaining our autonomy are morally significant, then any limitation of our autonomy is morally suspect. Our interests in maintaining our autonomy are morally significant. Therefore, any limitation of our autonomy is morally suspect. Infringements of privacy limit our autonomy. Therefore, infringements of privacy are morally suspect. So this is an argument in favor of privacy, suggesting that we should not infringe on privacy based on considerations of autonomy. So is there any counter to the privacy argument from autonomy? A first counter might be that our interests in maintaining our autonomy are morally significant, but that limitation of our moral autonomy is not morally suspect. So maybe limiting our autonomy is actually a normal thing, even though maintaining autonomy is morally important. This doesn't feel particularly plausible because it seems like if our autonomy is so important, then we should find it suspicious when we limit it. But perhaps there are other considerations that could be made here. The second counter is that our interests in maintaining our autonomy are not morally significant. So maybe autonomy is not a good in itself. Maybe autonomy is just a factor that is related pragmatically to other factors that we care about. Maybe ultimately autonomy can be discarded morally. Another counter is that infringements of privacy do not limit our autonomy. So maybe plausibly, you could live a perfectly public life. You could live in a glass house, but this does not actually infringe on your autonomy because you're still able to do whatever you want in that glass house. That would be this last counter here, is that you don't need privacy in order to have autonomy, essentially. Another argument is the privacy argument from personal relations. So the argument goes, any action that compromises our ability to sustain personal relationships is morally suspect. Many infringements of privacy compromise our ability to sustain personal relationships. Therefore, many infringements of privacy are morally suspect. So again, we have a defense of privacy, but in this case on the basis of maintaining personal relationships. What might be some counters to the argument from personal relations? Well, the first counter might be that any action that compromises our ability to sustain personal relations is not morally suspect. So maybe we want to sustain personal relations, but this isn't necessarily a moral requirement. Maybe it's simply an interpersonal desire or something like that, not a moral consideration. A second counter might be that not many infringements of privacy compromise our ability to sustain personal relationships. So in this counter, we're just saying that we can have personal relationships that violate our privacy. Maybe we have a personal relationship that has absolutely no privacy at all, and maybe that's fine for all parties involved. The next argument is the argument from intimacy. This argument goes, any action that compromises our ability to sustain intimate personal relationships is morally suspect. Many infringements of privacy compromise our ability to sustain intimate personal relationships. Therefore, many infringements of privacy are morally suspect. So what might be some counters to this argument from intimacy? The first counter is that any action that compromises our ability to sustain intimate personal relationships is not morally suspect. So maybe intimacy is just something we desire, but not something that we morally are required or morally are permitted even. A second counter may be that not many infringements of privacy compromise our ability to sustain personal relationships. So maybe we have intimacy, but maybe that intimacy is completely public. Maybe other people can see everything we do, but our personal relationship is still very intimate. Now, if we believe that intimacy requires some form of privacy, then we're going to reject this counter. But if we don't believe that intimacy requires some form of privacy, then we can probably allow for this counter. Another argument is the control of privacy argument. And it goes, if something is ours, then others may permissibly take it only if we offer our consent to do so. Violations of privacy involve others taking our information without our consent. Therefore, violations of privacy are impermissible. So this argument involves another defense of privacy, but this time in terms of our consent. What might be a counter to the control of privacy argument? Well, first we might counter that something is ours, but others may permissibly take it, not only if we offer our consent to do so. So maybe there are some times when consent is optional for people to use our things, even though they are our things. Maybe by virtue of living in a society, other people have rights to them as well. Maybe those rights aren't as large as ours. Maybe those rights are limited in some way, but maybe those rights still can happen in some circumstances where we don't give our consent. Another counter might be that violations of privacy do not involve others taking our information without our consent. So maybe information is not ours in the first place. Maybe our information is only information, for example, in our head. Maybe that's our information, but everything outside of our head is not ours. Maybe information is free, or information is a public good, not a private good. And maybe therefore they are not violations of privacy when these pieces of information are taken.